Hi. This slideshow is called Anita Sturgis Dole, the woman behind the minister. This was put together by our former camp director, Aaliyah Woofenden, and edited by me and my lovely wife, Nancy. And I'm just going to go through this real quick. Please feel free to break in with questions. As some of you may know, Anita Dole was the wife of one of the co-founders of the assembly here. And when Aaliyah became the camp director, she delved into camp history. And is that better? Yes. And she took a sudden interest in her great-grandmother-in-law, Anita Dole. And she put together this. This is a product of her research. So next slide, please. Family tree. Her father was James Dwight Sturgis. Notice this nice mustache. There'll be another photo later on that's even better. His mother, her mother was 15 years younger, Anna Gertrude Carey Sturgis. And just a little side note, I have two cufflinks, the kind they have to put through little holes in your sleeves that have an S on them that are family heirlooms that are Sturgis. Next slide, please. Anita Sturgis was born March 18th, 1889 in Chicago. A few years before she was born, her older sister Gertrude died at age 10. She was the last of 4 children from her father's second marriage, who had daughters from his previous marriage, so she grew up with her 2 brothers and 6 half-sisters. When she was born, her mother was 45 and her father was 60, but there was a 7-year gap between her next older brother, and herself. So she was much younger than everyone else in the family. She grew up in a very prosperous household. You'll notice there's lots of photos back then. If you had photos, you were rich. So she grew up in a very prosperous household with a full-time cook and a maid. She was raised to learn how to manage a house, but she did not know how to do the work herself. Next slide, please. So this is most of her family. On the left side, we have her blood brother, Fred, her half-sister, Amanda, and her father. Check out the beard. Mustache before, beard here. Really good. And real leather shoes. Okay, so these are all her half-sisters on the other side. Their names were Alice, Amanda, Margaret in the back. No, that's in the front. And Stella, Ella, and Amelia in the back. Next slide, please. Her beginnings. She was raised in the Episcopal Church, and she was confirmed there in 1902 when she was 13, just like in our denomination. We will be glad to confirm you when you're 13. Her father died that year at the age of 73. Her mother died 6 years later at age 64, leaving Anita an orphan at age 19. Both her parents were gone. She went to public schools and then majored in English at the University of Chicago, where she graduated with a BA in 1909. She was elected Phi Beta Kappa for her academic achievement. She was, what's the vernacular, wicked smart. She was so smart. She lived with her older brother Frederick for 10 years while she worked in academia, and we'll see where she worked in a slide or two. Next slide, please. This is Emily. Is that so, Emily?
Yeah.
That is so, Emily. Oh, is this an Emily look or what? This is Anita at age 10. And you know what? That looks so like my grandma. Next slide, please. So here's the jobs that she worked through in academia and afterwards. First, while she was still in school, she worked as a cataloger at the University Library in Chicago. And then she was secretary to a professor there for 2 years. And then she was a research assistant at the Chicago School of Civics and Philanthropy for another 2 years. And then she was assistant manager. She was moving up, graduate of a little publishing company. And all the while she was studying voice. Grandma had a wonderful voice. If anybody here ever hear my grandmother sing? Just amazing singer, absolutely amazing. Wonderful, wonderful voice. She studied voice. She was thinking about going into opera, but she changed her mind later on. In 1917, remember she graduated from college in 1909. In 1917, her sister Alice, this would be her half-sister, convinced her to take a teaching job at Urbana College. A certain young gentleman by the name of Louis Dole was there at the time. Historical context, it was very stressful and uncertain time then. World War II ran from 1914 to World War I from 1914 to 1918. The Spanish flu pandemic was going on, and women finally won the right to vote in 1921. Next slide, please. So here's two pictures of Anita at age 19. Here she's at her typewriter, writing all along. She wrote prolifically. Next slide, please. So her new church connections. As a student at Chicago University, she audited a philosophy class given by Louis Dole. This was her first introduction to him. In 1917, remember that's the year that her sister convinced her to work at Urbana. Evidently, she convinced her to go to Almont too. There she heard a lecture by the Reverend Dr. Thomas King, who I think was from Cincinnati, but I haven't been able to find that information confirmed anywhere. He gave a talk at Almont about the correspondence of the ass, and it was in the biblical story about Balaam's ass. So she was completely won over, like instantly. That's all she had to do. She heard this one lecture. She's like, oh, that's for me. It's the truth. I know it. And was confirmed into the new church at Almont that very same year. She changed careers, quit doing music, quit doing the other stuff, and dedicated her life to the new church and its teachings. Next slide, please. So here's a quote from Anita. She said, "The readings from the Word made a deep impression on me, set me thinking more seriously about my religion and to asking questions, and eventually led me to the only church in the world which has the answers. The reading from the epistles went in one ear and out the other, and I cannot to this day recall anything I learned from hearing them read in church." And all the quotes in here are either from the New Church Messenger or from a brief biography of her that's in the last volume of the Dole Notes. So next, please. This is Louis and Anita's wedding photos, and they're in the same frame, just like that. Reverend Dr. William R. Woofend and my father wrote about Anita in the little biography in the back of the Dole Notes, wrote about Anita meeting Reverend Louis Dole. She had been most strongly attracted to him, and how Mr. Dole had apparently taken no notice of her at all. However, when she returned from Almont, a confirmed and enthusiastic member of the new church, Mr. Dole lost no time in becoming better acquainted with the new teacher on his staff. They were married on New Church Day about 2 years later, June 19th, 1919. Anita was 30 years old, Louis was 34. Their marriage would last for 45 years until his death in 1964. Next slide, please. The wife of a minister. A little over a year into their marriage, Louis left Urbana College and accepted a call to serve the new church in Freiburg, Maine. They moved there in September 1920, and what originally started out as a 6-month trial turned into a 17 years of service at the Freiburg church. The idea of the Freiburg Summer School, as it was then called, immediately arose, and we've heard that story a few times over the last few years, so I won't retell it. The FNCA officially started the following summer with Reverend Louis Dole as its first president. In 1937, 17 years later, Louis accepted a call to serve the new church in Bath, Maine to help reestablish the worship services there. His father had been minister there before, and Louis had been confirmed there, but the church had stopped meeting. So Louis went there to try to revive it. Next slide, please. And this is a picture of Anita at their summer home in Wayne, where certain people just came from, and certain Doles just came from. And here she's in the boathouse, sitting in a wicker chair, typing away. I remember that boat.
Trevor?
Yes.
That is actually a bed inside a screen enclosure.
That's not that boat with the yellow.
No?
It's not. Okay. Okay, I believe you.
Just only recently it shows a little bit further towards right back. That's
Nice. All right, next slide, please. Children. It would take Anita 13 years to have 3 children out of a total of 12 pregnancies. Yeah. She was 40 years old when her youngest, George, was born. The oldest, Gertrude, born in 1925, was the second woman minister in convention. She married the Reverend Paul Tremblay of Edmonton, Alberta, late in life, and together they helped grow the church there and were training ministers in that region of Canada. Louise, my mother, born in 1927, married the Reverend Dr. William R. Wolfenden. She was an archivist at the Swedenborg School of Religion, and editor of Five Smooth Stones, which was the Sunday School Association publication. And she wrote a full set of children's activities for the Dole Bible study notes, which her mother had written decades earlier, and we'll hear about those in a future slide. George, born in 1932, was a classic scholar. He was a church pastor, taught for many years at the Swedenborg School of Religion, our denomination's theological school, and later in life moved back to Bath and served as pastor in the new church there until his retirement. Anita and Louis clearly passed their love and passion from the new church on to their children. Next slide, please. Quote, before his passing in 2021, George Dole reflected about his mother. I might laugh in this. She didn't talk very much about her own past. I know that she was born in a prosperous household and that her preparation for her family life involved learning how to manage a household. She married Dad when he was a headmaster, and they had their meals in the college dining hall, so when they moved from there to the parsonage in Freiburg, she was totally unprepared to be the household staff. I didn't know how to boil water, she said. She said the Freiburg church women were very understanding and helpful. She was in her 30s, and she didn't know how to cook at all. She managed her household very well, and I never knew her to complain of household chores. Next slide, please. And here they are, and here's Genevieve. This is Louis and Anita and Gertrude. Say it again. Yes, this Genevieve is Gertrude. Next slide, please. Volunteering. Grandma Dole was extremely involved in the community, both on the local level and on the state level. She was the PTA president where she lived and chair of the Constitution and Bylaws Committee at the state level for the state of Maine for the PTA. She was Girl Scouts commissioner for the Bath area. She was on the Maine Council of Churches, serving again on the Constitution and Bylaws Committee. She helped found the Bath Council of Women. She was the Red Cross production chair for World War II relief materials to be sent overseas from the Bath area. And within the church, she was in the National Alliance of New Church Women. She was a Mother Robin and a Round Robin chairman for 9-10 years. And for those of you who don't know what a Round Robin is, this was before the internet, folks. You would write a letter and send it to somebody, and they would add to it and send it to the next person on the list. And the Mother Robin was the one who was in charge of the list to make sure that the next person sent it along. So she was the Mother Robin, as well as chairing that committee for the National Alliance of New Church Women. And next slide, please. Dr. Wolfenden goes on to describe her this way. Through these and other activities, people of all faiths came to know and love her. And many found in her that rare combination of spiritual insight, practical advice, and personal interest, which brought them again and again to her door. Many were still corresponding with her at the time of her passing on. And that's again from the Dole Bible Study Notes. Next slide, please. And here's my parents' wedding day, and this is in the parsonage in Bath. And here's Anita right here. And that's my mom leaning into my dad. And I totally recognize this woman, but I couldn't tell you her name. Next slide, please. The Dole Bible Study Notes was Anita's life, work, and legacy based on many years of teaching Sunday school that took her 4 years or more of writing and research. She did it all herself. It was a 4-year Bible study course. It is a 4-year Bible study course with lessons and notes for 5 levels of teaching: primary, junior, intermediate, senior, and adult. She did all the research and writing herself, but wouldn't publish a single word until Louis read and approved it, because he was the minister. It was published as a 5-volume hardcover set, and her daughter Louise, my mother, later created a full set of activities for the children's lessons. Much, much later on, my father edited the current editions, which are still published by the Swedenborg Foundation today and still in public use. Next slide, please.
Can I just say something?
Yes, question, go ahead.
And if you go into any new church in the nation, never find the first volume of that on the shelf. All the other 5 are there.
If you look back here, there's like 3 volumes every other, one copy of volume 1.
Very popular. Very,
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. All right, next slide. Oh, we're at the next slide. Anita was active in the church all the way to the end of life, but she did look forward to seeing Louis again. My father said in her old age, she looked forward with increasing anticipation and some impatience to her passing into the spiritual world to join her beloved husband. Her son George said, when Dad died in 1964, she felt that her own time had come, but it hadn't. And this troubled her deeply. She'd been totally devoted wife, and every day she kept living seemed like an accusation. Her dedication as a wife also carried over to her relationship with the church community. She touched many, many people's life, even after her death, April 7th, 1973, at the age of 84. Next slide, please. And she became a grandmother. And this is my sister Jane, Aunt Gertrude, my mom, Grandpa Dole, my brother Ross, and Anita. And this is in the parsonage. This was Thanksgiving dinner. We have several pictures of this meal. Several. Somebody was taking pictures. I'm pretty sure my mother took the one we have at home because she's not, there's an empty place and she's not sitting in it. All right. And there was something that this silver set is in a lot of pictures. All right, next slide, please. She was a writer, and these are direct quotes from some of her writings from the Messenger. The characteristics which distinguish a man from an animal are the ability to know God and the freedom to choose whether he will learn of God and follow him or look to himself and the world for guidance. The Lord speaks to man directly only as we go to the Word for light and power to live rightly. It is the Lord who builds the church, and he can build it through us only if we learn, live, teach, and preach his word in the light he has given for this new age. Anita felt strongly called to teach others of all the knowledge about the new church. She wrote about the importance of providing different materials for different audiences. She was supportive of simpler literature being written for people who are interested in learning more. She said, every person who feels the need of help is worth reaching, and the new church has help for all. Next slide, please. She was also a painter. Have you seen these paintings?
I recognize the one on the right.
Okay. She did not sign her paintings, but it's believed that these 2 paintings that were in the Bath Parsonage are hers. This style is so much like my mother's painting that I would totally believe that it's my grandmother's.
Is that supposed to be the saw cup?
I don't think that it is. Yeah, there's islands in there that don't look at all familiar. But all right, next slide, please. Wisdom. This is Louis and Anita in the 1960s on the front steps of the Bath Parsonage. This is the picture of them I remember the most. I was there the day this picture was taken, and Grandpa Dole was standing down on the bottom step behind Grandma, and he's kind of short. And whoever's taking the picture said, "Louis, go up a step." And he was like, "I want to be next to her. I want to be next to her." You'll still be next to her. All right. Next slide, please. In an article in the May 1951 issue of the New Church Messenger, Anita talks about the challenge we all face in keeping God's messages spreading and finding comfort in God's Word. She says, she wrote, "Our world needs to know that the qualities manifested in Him are the divine qualities which alone can create happiness and peace in the individual life and in the world. And that trust in our own strength, either physical or intellectual, is in vain. It needs to know that the Bible is the book of love, with a spiritual meaning for the instruction and guidance of men today and for all time. It needs to know that a good life is a life of use, that idleness is death, and that charity is not almsgiving, but the performance of one's daily duties faithfully and honestly from a desire to serve the Lord and the neighbor." We just learned this week at camp. It needs to know that the divine providence is in things least as well as in things greatest, that evils are permitted for the sake of preserving that essential freedom without which we would not be human, and that they are permitted to break forth only that they may be seen and overcome.
Amen.
Next slide, please. This is, Grandma wrote a rather lengthy article called What is the New Church in the April 53 issue. She explains that it's a complete philosophy of life and that something that is, and not something that is easy to explain. She goes on to say that you cannot teach it or talk about it the same way to everyone. Each person you encounter will be different and you need to approach it from where they're coming from. She said, the individual's trouble is caused by particular problems. They may not ask or expect help or consider that religion has anything to do with their problems, yet the new church has help for each one of them. Do not start by talking about your church and telling what it has to offer. Encourage such a person to talk about his problem. Listen and consider it carefully and decide in your own mind what his fundamental difficulty really is and what teaching of the church could help him. Listen to this. Then try to lead his mind toward it. The teachings of the new church are without exception what people need, and they answer all the deep questions of life and point the way to happiness both here and thereafter. Amen. Next slide, please. So she left a legacy behind. This is Stuart and George and Anita in the fireplace in 1964. This photo is actually dated 1963, but see this door that goes into the Dole wing? The Dole wing was built in 64. That door went outside in 1963, so we know this was 64. Next slide, please. So here's the sources. It's the Bible study notes. What do you call it? Little bio my father wrote. Several articles from Messenger. Guards Hidden Roots of the Assembly. That's on our website. And an email with George, February 2021. Is that soon enough? A phone call with Carolyn in March. Messenger article, Messenger article. O Jerusalem, which is a history of the Freiburg New Church. And the photographs came from my brother Ian, my brother Todd, and our website, and Lois Dole. And we have one last slide to show, and I'm just going to leave this one sitting up. So, questions, comments? Anybody have any stories to share?
She know Lois Wilson?
Say it again.
She know Lois Wilson?
Did Grandma Dole know Lois Wilton? I don't even know who that is, so I couldn't tell you.
The wife of Bill Wilson, the founder of AA. That last thing you read sounded just like something out of the big book. Just curious, because she was a Swedenborg.
She married.
I believe she did.
Okay.
I think she did. I think there's Lois Burnham. Yes. Lois Burnham.
Trevor, can you pass around the microphone?
Oh, yes.
Yes, microphone so that she can hear you online.
This one's good?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Who would like to say something? Any questions, comments, stories? Yes, Dean.
I wasn't born into this denomination, but my wife left a book on the bed one day, 1988, and it was so dense. And then I went to the church, and Robert McCluskey pointed out, hey, there are these books here. And so I started to read them, and they were dense, so I just did the first level, read it all the way through. I think it was like...
You're talking about the Dole notes?
I'm talking now about the Dole notes, And it's set up, as you say, 5 different ways. And each time your eyes are opened a little more.
Oh.
I'm so grateful for.
Yay. Other comments, questions? Guard. Not as fast as...
Thank you, Trevor. I think we all are really appreciative of this wonderful
Yeah, thank Aaliyah. I just edited.
biography. Well, I do have one personal childhood recollection of your grandmother, Anita Dole. Here at Freiburg, I must have been about 10 years old, and I think I heard my grandmother Hazel Baker Clark, talk about the writings as being revelation from God. So as a 10-year-old, I had this in my mind. I could not have been thinking of this on my own as I recall this. So the memory is I was standing in the morning in front of the lovely fireplace with the fire going. bright flames licking at logs in the fireplace on a cold morning at the assembly. And I'm standing next to Anita Dole. And just innocently, I remember my grandmother saying this was revelation from Swedenborg's writings. And I looked up at your grandmother and I said, "How do you know that these writings are revelation?" I remember distinctly looking at her glasses, and the flames were reflecting on. I mean, this is so. They were absolutely reflecting on her. I'm looking up her, and she doesn't say a word. I'm thinking she's not going to answer this, and I was probably about to turn away when she starts speaking, and she said, "Yes, they are revelation, and I know they are revelation. And the only way I know that is because I have tried them in my life." Wow. And I remember her saying, okay, so there's a personal 10-year-old story of a lovely experience.
It's wonderful.
The visual is what I remember most, and the audible is there as well.
It's wonderful. And Guard still likes to light fires today. Jane.
Yes, I have a question because the Dole notes are was my introduction to Swedenborg completely. And in Pretty Prairie, they just go over and over and over them. But the story that's there, and the one I want to know if it's true, I was told that she was not paid to write the Dole notes, but somebody came and took care of the kids so she would have time. So her payment was kind of a babysitter for the kids. Was that true?
I have heard that story as well. I have no confirmation of whatsoever, but it is family history.
And she wasn't paid anything to write
No, she
them.
wasn't.
Yeah.
No, she
It was
totally.
a love
Just
of
like
her
everyone
life.
here, we're donating our services. We
Yeah.
don't get paid for this, and she
Okay,
didn't.
thank
It was
you.
total work of love. Anybody else? Susanna.
One of the things that I mentioned in a lecture this week was how we, at this 100th anniversary, we need to remember that we are a part of the Assembly's life. We might go home thinking, oh, Assembly, that's part of my summer, I go every year. But we are part of the Assembly's life. And her legacy is such a wonderful reminder that we all are what makes this happen. We, and our dedication to the writings, and she's so inspirational. Makes me want to go home and write.
Anyone else have something to say? Steve? Yeah. Talk right into the microphone, please.
My dad, Harold Larson, was a convert from Lutheranism, and he took a lot of heat for that in Brooklyn, New York, which was filled with Norwegian Lutherans. And when he first came to Freiburg, we all came with him. I think the year was 1950 or 1951. And the thing that really made the difference for him was meeting both Louis and Anita. And the Dole notes were tremendously important for him. He prepared his sermons from them. He taught from the Dole notes.
Wonderful.
And he said, these are good news right straight from heaven.
All right. Anybody else? Before we close, just want to say this again is Grandma's wedding photo. This photo was taken in 1944. She's holding something in her hand, and standing next to her in this picture, facing her, is a World War II soldier. And this was during the time when she was chairing the committee in Bath that collected materials to send overseas for the war. And I believe who she was facing was a clerk. It's written on the photo. I believe it was a clerk. Space in the name. But Harold, or that's not Harold. And this final photo was from the Messenger. It was found in the Women's Alliance photo, and it's completely undated. so we have no idea. But that's my grandma. Can we all give her a big round of applause, please? Thank you very much.